Now, my dad took an economics course back in the 1970s when he was an undergrad. He likes to say that the only thing that he remembers from class is that MC equals MR. This is partially because he slept through class, so there wasn't too much for him to remember, and partially because his professor said, if you take one thing away from this class, I want you to remember this. Now, it is important, so I want you to take this away from this class too. Marginal revenue is the additional revenue from the firm, or that the firm earns selling from one more unit of output. The marginal cost is the additional cost that the firm incurs from producing that unit of output. If the firm is maximizing profits, they will produce up to the point where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. If they stop producing before that, when the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost, they're in effect leaving money on the table. By producing an additional unit, they can increase their profit. So if they are leaving money on the table, if they're not producing where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost, they won't do that very long. They'll increase their production until marginal revenue equals the marginal cost where they maximize their profit. But they also don't want to produce more than that, where the marginal revenue is less than the marginal cost. At this point, they're just losing money on each unit. Just like a firm maximizes profits by producing up to the point where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost, a firm also maximizes profits when they hire workers by applying a similar rule. Think of their decision to hire labor, their labor demand curve, in the same way. So firms aim to optimize their choices by comparing the marginal benefits to the marginal cost. So they want to hire workers until the value of their marginal product equals the added cost of hiring that worker. When the value of an additional worker produces, their VMPL is greater than the wages that they're paid, the firm can increase profits by hiring more workers. However, if the cost of hiring an additional worker, so the wages paid to those workers, are greater than the value than they add to the firm will hire fewer workers. Now, profit maximization occurs where the value of the marginal product of labor equals the wage rate. Both of these decisions, the firm's output level and how many workers to hire, follow the same profit maximizing logic. In the production decision, the firm compares the marginal revenue to the marginal cost. In the hiring decision, the firm compares the value of what a worker produces to the wage they're paid. In both cases, the firm stops increasing production or hiring workers, which in effect is the same thing in this case, when the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. So let's go back to that bakery example. In the production decision, the bakery decides how many cookies to bake by comparing the revenue from selling one more cookie to the marginal cost of baking it. They're going to bake cookies up to the point where the marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and that will maximize their profits. Now, when it comes to hiring workers, the bakery also faces a decision. How many bakers should they hire? Each baker contributes to producing more cookies, and the value of their contribution depends on how many additional cookies they can produce and what those cookies sell for. The bakery will keep hiring workers as long as the value of what they produce is greater than the wage they have to pay. So they'll stop hiring when the marginal value of the employee's production is equal to their wage rate. So let's toss some numbers in here. If the value the cookies a baker produces an hour is $25, but they only need to pay that baker $20 an hour, they will hire more bakers. But if the value of those cookies drop to $20 or even lower, the firm will stop hiring because it's no longer profitable to do so at that wage. Now, something that's common in economics is people saying, sure, this theory is great, but people don't really take this stuff into account. Or sometimes they don't even know the things that your model says they need to know when they make their decisions. Now, this may be true in some cases, but what's interesting is that people behave as if they do take these things into account. For economists, this is great because we don't need to know if it's exactly what's going on in people's heads, as long as our theory maps onto their actions and shows how different changes will result in different responses. Even though firms might not sit down and explicitly calculate the marginal productivity of each worker, and even if it's not possible to do so because of the complex production patterns, their actions will still align with the principles of marginal productivity theory. The key idea here is that firms are always trying to be as efficient as possible and trying to maximize profits to stay in business. So let's go back to that small pizza shop I talked about earlier. The owner might not calculate exactly how much value each delivery boy and counter staff worker adds to the shop's revenue, but they know that if the shop is getting busy and customers are waiting too long, hiring another worker might speed things up and bring in more customers or satisfy their customers more and have them willing to pay higher prices. On the other hand, if the shop is slow and not selling enough pizza, hiring more staff would just increase their costs without increasing their revenue. The owner makes decisions based on these practical, real-life observations, but these real-life practical observations are in line with the principle of marginal productivity theory. Our theory that we've been talking about maps onto what types of decisions and how the owner of firms or the managers of firms reach these decisions. Employers constantly make decisions that reflect how valuable each worker is to the firm, even if they're not explicitly, writing down equations to figure this out. For example, if hiring an additional worker helps the company produce more goods and earn more revenue than the cost of that worker's wages, the employer will hire them. If they don't produce more goods and earn more revenue than their wage, if their wage is higher than that, then they won't hire. This is the basic logic of marginal productivity theory. And employers and employees act as if they understand marginal productivity because failing to do so can hurt their profitability. Now, I've been going on pretty long, and we're a little bit less than halfway through the chapter still. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll begin with the next section in the next lecture.